So Pearl is actually going to start us for a moment here, Chaim.
All right, go ahead.
Good evening. I am Pearl Carney, director of the Rabbi Chaim Seidler-Feller Institute for Jewish Learning. Before Chaim starts his class tonight, his close friend, Professor David Myers, wants to say a few words. Professor Myers teaches Jewish history at UCLA and has worked closely with Chaim for many years. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor David Myers.
Thank you, Perla. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great.
Yes, we can.
Good. You in particular, Chaim. So I'm sorry to intervene, but this is an important matter. I wanted to let you all know that recently a book has appeared, which I'm going to show you here. It's called Swimming Against the Currents, Reimagining Jewish Tradition in the 21st Century, Essays in Honor of Chaim Seidler-Feller. And you may ask, what is this and why is this? And the why is, well, first of all, it is what's known as a Festschrift, which is a celebratory volume in honor of a revered teacher. And when one thinks of what one can get Chaim, the first thing that leaps to one's mind is a book. But there are very few books that Chaim doesn't have that I would think of getting him. So we had to go out and make a book. And in that task, I was assisted by, in the first instance, Chaim's wife, Dr. Doreen Seidler-Feller, and then throughout really the heavy lifting of the production of the book, Chaim's son, Shaul Seidler-Feller, who is himself a very promising young scholar and an amazingly knowledgeable person about Jewish bibliography, and shares with Chaim a deep passion for Jewish books. Why did we do this now? Why not? Chaim had a nice round birthday coming up, and we thought, what better gift could we provide for him than a book? And in thinking of why we wanted to do it to him, I guess I would invoke the classic phrase from the Jewish tradition, Kishmo ken hu. As is Chaim's name, so is he. Chaim is life. Chaim is full of vitality, a font of vitality. And Chaim is life-sustaining, and indeed has been for so many of us. I can't imagine my existence in Los Angeles over the last 30 years without Chaim. It just is an unimaginable prospect at every level, personal, Jewish, scholarly. Chaim has been my beloved partner and friend. And so too, he has been the beloved and partner and friend to the 25 or 28 people who are included in this book, scholars of great renown in many different fields, from Bible to rabbinics to medieval philosophy to Jewish thought to law, political theory, an illustrious collection of people readily acceded to our request to participate in this volume. And it is really a treasure, a collection of pearls of wisdom that reflect Chaim's deep passion and searing intellect. One final word before letting you know how you can access this volume, and I think it requires relatively little explanation. The title, Swimming Against the Current. Chaim is an iconoclast, let it be said. He's an iconoclast both with respect to Jewish tradition, but also with respect to the project of modernity. And indeed, Chaim is one of the great mediators between tradition and modernity that I know, and approaches both of those projects with his unique blend of wisdom, intelligence, and iconoclasm. So I'm delighted to share with you what we had hoped to share in a public convening around this time in Los Angeles 2 days ago, 2 days hence, I believe on the 20th of May. We plan to also have a public convening in New York, and I promise that we will in both locations. But for the time being, let us, in fact, take pride and pleasure in this tribute to Chaim, our teacher, our beloved teacher. And I'm now sending you the link to how you can purchase this volume. And Chaim, you know that this volume was produced not just with the requisite reverence and admiration, but with the deepest love amongst all of those of us who participate in it. So a small gift to you before you teach.
Thank you. I have to tell everybody that when this book was presented to me a few weeks ago in New York among a small group of people, and I was overwhelmed. To me, it's unbelievable. And it's true that I can't conceive of a more meaningful gift from friends to share the learning and their love. And I ought to say that that David Myers has been not just a sort of a colleague in arms and compatriot, comrade, let's call him a comrade, but my chevruta. And there's a Talmudic saying, which is o chevruta, o mituta, either chevruta or death. And so that just like the poet said in the Song of Songs, that love is as strong as death, the learning, the bonds of learning between people, the sharing, not only of ideas, of the arguments that we have with one another, the trust that we develop to differ with one another, both privately and publicly. It's a gift. It's a gift. And I think a lot of that energy was invested in the volume, and of course, it's not a small matter that Shaul participated in helping to edit this volume. So thank you everybody, and thanks to Hillel, thanks to Giselle and Perla and Aaron for facilitating this particular moment that we could share. And I hope that in the future, I spoke to David and to Aaron, at least, a goodly number of the people participated in the volume live in Los Angeles. And I think we should be able to call on them. We'll talk about that, what we can do when we have a public event and share in their learning. Okay, so the subject of today's session is learning, actually, the value of learning. So I think that we'll see how this develops. I did want to begin, however, with a note on last week's discussion because of a question someone sent me an email, and it was a challenging question because of the assertion that I made that religion was to be a check on nationalism. And of course, I think that I conditioned that assertion that it's an idealized notion of religion because historically religion has been co-opted by the governing authorities or itself sought out the power of the governing authorities. On the other hand, religion has the capacity to be sort of the critic from the side. So I just want to share with you two elements, two stories that relate to Ben-Gurion. Ben-Gurion was a person that, Agnon would call a kliga yid. He was a very smart Jew. And here, if you hear these two stories, you'll understand the different dimensions of Ben-Gurion. In one conversation that he had with Yeshayahu Leibovitz, Leibovitz challenged him and said, Ben-Gurion, what does this mean that you have a chief rabbi in Israel? It's a secular government. The labor Zionism is as the foundation of Israel, and the chief rabbinate is completely incongruous with the idea of a secular nation state. So Ben-Gurion's response to Leibovich was, I prefer to have the rabbi working for me than as an independent force. Because Ben-Gurion understood the potential in religion to undermine or to be a critic of the authority of the state. And if he could co-opt the religious leaders, then they would be on his side. They wouldn't be in opposition, right? And basically, he would defang them. It also was a cynical movement. On the other side, there's a film that I recommend to everybody if you can somehow get a hold of it. It doesn't have wide distribution because the filmmaker didn't, for some reason, they never got it distributed well. It's called Ben-Gurion Epilogue. And there's a scene where after he declares the state, he has a meeting with Buber, Samuel Hugo Bergman, with Ernst Simon, with the intellectuals, who were always critical of Ben-Gurion and always critical of the political efforts. And Ben-Gurion turned to them. This is really, to me, an amazing moment. And he said, now I really need you. Because now you can fulfill your role as being the critics from the side. I mean, and that's very important. I want you to understand that as a significant dimension of that people, of academics, of thinkers. It's not necessarily to become involved in the political establishment. But if we take them seriously, we understand they have something to say about the important issues of the day. And if you are a leader who has self-confidence, understanding, and ideals, then you want to make sure that you listen, that you hear those leaders from the side, even if you don't always follow what they have to say, and you take them seriously. So I think, so you have these two sides of Ben-Gurion. On the one hand, wanting to control opposition, and the other side, wanting to hear from the opposition as an important determinant or as an influence, some sort of influence. And I would hope I would hope that religious leaders and thinkers could return to that sort of classic understanding of what I think their public role is. All right, now for today. So many of you are familiar with the custom of staying up all night on Shavuot. It's not a biblical custom, but it has some ancient roots. And what I want to share with you, show you sort of a little bit of the historical background, how it emerges, and also to understand the depths of what this enactment is all about. It's a ritual. It's not merely about intellectual activity of staying up all night and studying. It has sort of ritual religious value. And it speaks to the centrality of study and of Torah in Jewish life. In other words, Torah is not a book of instruction. Torah is the love partner of the Jewish people and of each individual Jew. I mean, that's sort of an essential dimension of how we understand ourselves. That's at least the way the tradition presents it. And we'll see some expression of this. So the first source is not one that most of us are familiar with, and that's Philo. Philo, you may know, lived in Egypt, was active in the 1st century before Christ, and wrote in Greek. Most probably did not know much Hebrew. He was the greatest Jewish philosopher of his age. Didn't know Hebrew. In fact, it was only in the early modern period, you might say, 16th century, that a Jewish historian in Italy crowned him with a Jewish name. He called him Yedidia, lover of God, Philo. Okay, you understand that, Philo. And that was Azario de Rossi. So his work was basically sustained and kept and played a significant role in the church rather than in Jewish life. Jews knew very little about Philo, and the community in Alexandria disappeared. It's both a mystery. We know that there was a revolt and there was an uprising. It was a very prominent community, and a community that in some ways I think it's worthy of our of some reflection on the nature of Jewish life in Alexandria in those centuries, because it was a life lived in fullness, in the fullness of a Hellenistically influenced Judaism, a rich Judaism and a rich exposure to the surrounding culture, and an integration that was achieved on a very high level. And Jews were also successful in Alexandria, which may have been the cause of their demise later on, I think a century or so later, into the 1st or 2nd century of our era. So Philo writes about a group called the Therapeutae. Josephus mentions them as well. They're similar to the Essenes. I think the description that we have of them is really, I think, beautiful and much fuller. And one has the sense that Philo is intimately familiar with the Therapeutae and that he may be a member of the group. It could be that Therapeutae has something to do with healing, as you can tell from the root, or it simply is an expression of some sort of spiritual, it's a spiritual collective. It's a spiritual communion. Now, as I read this, you're going to say to yourself, this is Jewish? Well, let me read. So Philo writes, first of all, on the contemplative life. This is Jewish. I also want to speak about their common meetings, that is of the Therapeutae, and the cheerful ways in which they conduct their banquets, in contrast to other people's dinner parties. But because these famous banquets are full of such foolishness, they condemn themselves if one disregards conventional opinion and the ordinary view that these banquets were entirely proper. By way of contrast, I will describe the banquets of those persons who have dedicated their lives and themselves to knowledge and contemplation of the things of nature in accord with the supremely sacred teachings of the prophet Moses. First of all, these people gathered together after 7 weeks, showing reverence not only for the 7th day, but also for the square of 7, for they know that it is holy and ever virgin. So there's a suggestion here, an intimation that this special banquet was observed on Shavuot, the 7 weeks. Shavuot meaning weeks, 7 weeks after Passover. It's also possible that the Therapeutae actually had a calendar, much like the group that's in the Book of Jubilees, or the Essenes, who had sort of 50-day cycles. It's possible, but we don't really know everything about their calendar. And know this. I mean, I think you should know that in the first centuries there was not one Jewish calendar. There were a variety of Jewish calendars until the rabbis centralized and imposed their authority, or was successful in imposing their authority and in organizing Jewish life. So he continues to write as follows. So every 7 weeks, here we are. First of all, these people write every 7 weeks, and not only 7th day, and it is the evening of the great feast, which comes on day 50, 50 being the most sacred number, and the one like the Yovel, the Jubilee, and the one in accord with nature, based on the square of the right angle triangle, which is the beginning of the formation of the universe. When therefore they come together dressed in white, and with the most solemn joy, one of those on duty for the day, for such is the title given by custom to those who perform these services, gives a quiet signal. Then before they recline at a table, they stand in order in a regular line with eyes and hands lifted up to heaven. This is how, listen to this. They raise their eyes since they have been trained to give attention to things worthy of contemplation. They raise their hands to show that they are clean and uncontaminated by any money-making or even the appearance of commerce. They pray to God that their feast may be acceptable and in accord with God's will. After the prayers, the seniors recline in order of their admission, for they do not consider persons of advanced years or gray heads to be true seniors, but only young children if they have come to love this commitment only in advanced years. For them, true seniors are persons who have from an early age spent their lives devoted to the contemplative branch of philosophy, which is indeed the most beautiful and divine part. Women also take part in the feast. Most of them are elderly virgins who have preserved their purity not because they had to, like some Greek priestesses, but by choice. Their choice is based on zeal and thirst for wisdom. They have been eager to live with wisdom and therefore have ignored the pleasures of the body, desiring not mortal children, but immortal ones. Only the soul, which is beloved by God, can bear such offspring by herself. Only the Father has sown in her the intellectual light rays, which enable her to perceive the doctrines of wisdom. So the contemplative life is a life that contemplates the nature of God and seeks to unite with God. And whatever children people have are a consequence of that unity with God. Likewise, the table is kept pure from meat. It has on it only loaves of bread with salt for seasoning, sometimes hyssop being added as well for those who have more delicate appetites. Right reason teaches those who share this life to abstain from wine, just as it teaches that lesson to priests when they offer sacrifices. For wine is the drug that induces folly, and rich dishes stir up desire, that most insatiable of creatures. Right? I mean, it's a fascinating text. The interpretation, by the way, the whole series of Philo's works are interpreted in the Loeb Classics, published by Harvard University, and there is some more contemporary translations of parts of Philo. There's a Hebrew edition of Philo, so you can avail yourself. And his interpretation of Torah is fantastic and important. I mean, it's an allegorical interpretation and really important. The interpretation of the sacred scriptures are given through hidden meanings and allegories. For these people think that the entire law is like a living animal, the body corresponding to the literal commandments, the soul corresponding to the invisible meaning stored up in the words. In this meaning, the rational soul begins to distinguish and see the things that are like itself, looking through the words as through a mirror and perceiving the extraordinary beauties of the concepts. That mind perceives the things revealed and discloses and reveals the symbols, leading forth the ideas naked for those who are able, through a little reminding, to see the invisible by means of the visible. After the meal, they keep the sacred all-night, after the meal, they keep the sacred all-night festival. Sounds like Shavuos. Now, this is how the all-night festival is celebrated. The entire company stands up together and forms two choruses, at first in the middle of the dining room, one of men, the other of women. The most honored and musical person is chosen as director and leader of each of the choruses. Then they sing hymns to God that have been composed in many rhythms and melodies, sometimes singing together, sometimes singing in antiphonal harmony, gesturing and dancing and filling with enthusiasm. Now in procession, now while standing still, sounds like the Shakers, sometimes moving in a dance line from right to left and then from left to right. Then when each of the choirs has performed its own part by itself, as in the Bacchic revels, having drunk of the strong wine of those who are beloved by God, they mingle together and become a single choir, a copy of that one which of old was set up by the Red Sea, or the Reed Sea, because of the miracles that took place there. What happened at the sea? Moses and Miriam sang together, the men and the women, and they danced. For at the command of God, the sea became a cause of salvation for one group and destruction for the other. For when the sea was broken up and pushed by violent forces, forcing it back, there rose on either side solid walls facing each other. The space in between became a dry path, an open road for all, by which means the people were escorted to higher ground on the opposite shore. On the other hand, when the water rushed back from both sides across the space that had been dry, the pursuing soldiers were engulfed and destroyed. Seeing and experiencing this, a deed surpassing word and thought and hope, both men and women were inspired by God, and having become a single chorus, sang thanksgiving hymns to God as their savior. Moses the prophet leading the men, Miriam the prophetess leading the women. It is on this model above, all that the choir of the Therapeutae and Therapeuterides, their notes and voices answering one another, and the women's high voices mixing with the lower voices of the men, create a true musical harmony. Their thoughts and words are surpassingly beautiful, and the singers are sanctified. And the goal of thoughts, words, and singers is piety. Intoxicated till dawn, therefore, with this splendid drunkenness, in which there is no headache or drowsiness, being more awake and alert than when they came to the banquet. They stand with eyes and the whole body turned toward the east. When they see the sunrise, they stretch out their hands to heaven and pray for bright days, truth, and keenness of mind. Then after praying, they all return to their individual sanctuaries to resume cultivating their philosophical studies. Okay, so it is. I mean, I'm sort of breathless reading this text. I never read it fully myself in this fashion, out loud especially, And I think it's extremely moving. I don't know, how you react to this. Whether we can actually aspire to this. Do we think that this is a model for us? A celibate, I don't know whether, it's unclear whether they were celibate, meaning they could have had, some of them could have been married before they entered the communion. Then they left their families, or they brought their families with them. And when they entered the communion, they lived as celibate. We don't know everything about them, but it was a spiritual community, and it seems to be a model for Christian monastic life, and that existed early on, and it existed outside Alexandria in the desert. The Egyptian desert was the home and source of Christian monasticism, early Christian monasticism. So that's. But what struck me was not only that sort of spiritual dimension, but the fact that it's linked to Shavuot. So there's something about Shavuot that in its essence bespeaks some spiritual some connection beyond, some transcendent dimension. It does, and that has to do with the mystery of Shavuot. Maybe one of you can tell me, what's the mystery of Shavuot as a holiday listed in the Bible? What's absent in Shavuot? Any one of you can unmute.
No fixed date.
No set date. There's no set date for Shavuot. Yes, what else?
No event.
No event. All right, even in some ways more significant. There's no fixed date, but there's no historical event that it celebrates.
What does Sukkot celebrate?
So Sukkot celebrates our wandering in the desert.
Shavuot.
So it says. That's the historical connection that's given. But and we say the Hallel for God's sort of intervention in our history. Where's the history? It's only later that it's associated with the giving of the Torah. But you might say that the giving of the Torah is itself not a historical event. Who says that's history? In other words, who in their right mind really thinks that the revelation at Sinai is a piece of history? That's reductionist, diminishing, and it somehow, in many ways, it diminishes the value of the entire event to try to convert it to an event that we can prove that it happened. Who knows? Who knows? That's not what it's all about. There's something about a connection with God that's being celebrated, where the teaching or the notion that we are a people who are given a teaching that adheres to a teaching, that becomes a foundational experience for us. But it's a religious experience. I wouldn't call it a historical experience. Although far be it from me in any way to be critical or diminish the value of history, but in the realm of religion, there's a different sort of value system. Historical episodes occur, yes, but then they pass. Religious events or experiences live on. They're not bound by time. Shavuos, it's not bound by time. We're going to come back to this. That's what gives it its eternal significance. It lives. It didn't happen. That's the point. We're not looking for things that happen. We're looking for things that are happening, that happen in our life, that we can connect to. When these therapeutae have their experience, they have a direct experience in their spiritual mode of something that's happening to them, not something that happened in the past. Now let's look further in terms of the development of the Shavuot.
Quick question.
Another classic Jewish source, the Acts of the Apostles. Now the Acts was written by Luke, so towards the end of the first century, and indeed it does reflect Jewish practice. Here we have it. When Pentecost Day came around, they had all met in one room when suddenly they heard what sounded like a powerful wind from heaven, the noise of which filled the entire house in which they were sitting, and something appeared to them that seemed like tongues of fire. This is, by the way, a classic motif. Spiritual experience surrounded by fire. There's something, sort of the divine is manifest in the quaking sound, in the shofar sound, in the rumble, and in the fire. Right? There's something magical and powerful. These separated and came to rest on the head of each of them. They were all filled with the Holy Spirit. That is, all the people who were present on Pentecost, and began to speak foreign languages as the Spirit gave them the gift of speech. Now, this is the passage that some of you are familiar with, right? If I asked you what this is describing, you would say it's describing glossolalia, right? What are you showing me, David? I can't see, so it's a problem. You can you unmute yourself?
I was just agreeing.
Oh, okay. All right. So most people would assume, that speaking in tongues, that the people had were sort of drunk with their divine experience, and they started speaking nonsense. People heard them speaking in tongues, but that's not what happened. Look what it says. Now there were devout men living in Jerusalem from every nation under heaven. And at this sound, they all assembled, each one bewildered to hear these men speaking his own language. In other words, the people who had this experience were speaking the different languages of the Jews or of all the people who had gathered in Jerusalem for Pentecost, because it's one of the pilgrimage festivals. So you have people from all over the world, and this collected group that had been inspired, speaks all the languages. Not that it speaks nonsense. They're speaking different languages. They were amazed and astonished. Surely, they said, all these men speaking are Galileans. How does that happen that each of us hears them in his own native tongue? Parthians, Medes, and Elamites, people from Mesopotamia, Judea, and Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, et cetera, Egypt, as well as visitors from Rome, Jews and proselytes alike, Cretans and Arabs. We hear them preaching in our own language about the marvels of God. Everyone was amazed and unable to explain it. They asked one another what it all meant. Some, however, laughed it off. They had been drinking too much new wine, they said. Okay. Now, what does it mean that they spoke in all the languages? Anyone want to venture a suggestion here? Because I think it's very rich theologically, this idea. Yes, go ahead. Jerome, you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, okay. That I think there's an element that say when the Torah itself is also given, it is given in a way beyond normal hearing, that everyone understood it in their own language, in their own thing. So what's going on here, it's a mirroring of that in the sense that they are now channeling this theophany, and everyone is understanding the sounds in their own language.
Correct. So there's both, there's an enormous sort of, what do you call it, spiritual aspect to this, and a very human dimension. The human dimension, I think Jerome presented beautifully. Everybody was able to hear it in their own way. In other words, that's the power of a revelation. That's not just an intellectual experience. It's something in which people were given an opportunity to relate to based on their own person. Each person had their own experience of that revelation at Sinai, and so too here. It's represented. Each person understood it in their own way. But there is also a broad sort of, in many ways, a philosophical point that's being made, which is that Torah is universal. Torah has significance for all. The tradition speaks about 70 languages. There are 70 languages, 70 nations. And the Torah itself was revealed in the 70 languages. If you were a member, we were told when we were children that if you were a member of the Sanhedrin, of the high Jewish court, then you had to know 70 languages to become a member of the Sanhedrin. So, I mean, it's a nice idea. In other words, it means that and Maimonides would agree with this fully, if Torah is to be meaningful, it can't just be a private language. In other words, then it's sort of a dead letter. It's a particular community, and we have our own little way of being. If it's something that's really serious and is a way of life, it has to be able to instruct us beyond merely our own little way of being, and allow us to develop our way in connection to others. And if it's a way of wisdom, wisdom isn't Jewish, right? God is not Jewish. And I still remember when I was, the year that I was on sabbatical in Israel, and it goes back to 1980, and studying at the Hartman Institute, the Friday magazine of Ma'ariv, which at that time was I think the leading daily newspaper, had a front cover with David Hartman on the front cover, with a basketball in his hands and in shorts. And this is Rabbi Professor David Hartman. And the headline on the magazine, which is a fantastic headline, Ha'Elohim Shali Eino Yehudi. My God is not Jewish. Okay, that's exactly the point. How could God be God and God be Jewish? So here, how could Torah be Torah and Torah only be Jewish? Torah has to have significance beyond. Now, this theme is carried on into the Tikkun Leyl Shavuot. So source number 3 is the Zohar. Now we're getting closer to the actual practice, although it's not yet a practice. All we have is this. Let me say a word. First of all, just a word from your sponsor. This translation of the Zohar is taken from the Pritzker edition. And I want you to know what the Pritzker edition is. The Stanford University Press has been publishing a magnificent modern translation of the Zohar. It's in 10 volumes. And one of the Pritzkers funded the project. She had studied some of the Zohar in a small volume that a professor named Daniel Matt had prepared in verse, by the way, in verse. It's a beautiful volume. It's published in a series called Classics of Western Spirituality, and it has a very small number of Zoharic passages. She was so moved by his translation that she then negotiated to buy out his contract and sponsor him and a group of scholars to engage in what became a 15-year project of publishing this multi-volume translation with notes and a whole apparatus online with original Aramaic and manuscripts and sources, background sources, introduction, et cetera, et cetera. And Matt continues to teach, by the way. He teaches online. He does a class once a week that you can look for online at Stanford University Press. So this is a passage from the Zohar was written in a medieval Aramaic. It was attributed to Shimon Bar Yochai. Shimon Bar Yochai is one of Rabbi Akiva's circle. He lived in the 2nd century. He hid in a cave for 13 years. He hid from the Romans, and the legend developed around him because of his, both because of the strength of his personality and the stories that are told when he emerged from the cave, that he had been transformed by this experience, this inner, and to become an inner being, a divine, almost divinely, certainly divinely inspired, but more than divinely inspired, sort of divine. He became the embodiment of some dimension of the divine. So who else would have written such a marvelous work about God than Shimon Bar Yochai? So the Zohar is attributed to his authorship, although we know pretty much for sure that it was a circle of medieval mystics in 13th century Spain. The center, or the leader of the group, was a man named Moses de Leon. But there were others. The Zohar is a community project. I mean, there are different aspects and different parts of the Zohar. But as its name indicates, it's a book of brilliance and radiance. It's a book about light, about how to bring the light into your lives. It's constructed as a midrash, as an interpretive, mystical reflection on the biblical text, interpreting the biblical text symbolically. The personalities in the text are symbols. The laws in the text are symbols. And these are all symbols of the inner matrices of the divine. And the Torah becomes itself a guidebook in how a human individual can sort of attain some connection with the spiritual world through the contemplating the Torah and the teachings based on the Torah. So the group, the authors of the Zohar were very creative. And a lot of, I think you'll note that a lot of this evening's lesson is more on the poetry side. And it seems to me, we need poetry too in Judaism. It's not just about philosophy and law. The Zohar, in some ways, is a poetic creation. It's a beautiful creation. And there's a lot these days. Anybody who wants to study mysticism, and I'm sorry for making a snide comment, shouldn't have to go to the Kabbalah Center. I mean, in other words, and you shouldn't. I mean, if you really want to learn something, there are plenty of avenues and plenty of places where you can be educated in a way that won't manipulate you. So I think it's enlightening. It's certainly, just to know this, you should know that Zoharic teachings and mysticism in general have had an what's the word I'm looking for? An outsized influence on Jewish life.
Chaim,
Yes.
the translation of anything except mathematics is never exact.
Okay.
Especially poetry.
Okay. I shouldn't. I mean, you're hearing from a poet, my friend. So okay, I accept. I hear you.
You can translate the pashut, perhaps, but anything deeper than that comes out a little different. I have spent hours trying to translate the words Ruach Kadim into English and get the emotion of it.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you. You're absolutely right. All right. So so anyway, this is an account that does relate directly to Shavuot. So let me read. Rabbi Shimon, this is Shimon Bar Yochai. What I was going to mention was that he has a circle of friends who are part of his group that study together. They're called the Chevraya. They learn together. They teach one another. They share insights with one another. They walk through the forests with one another. What's really a sort of a characteristic of mystical literature, as it is of some Hasidic literature, is that a lot of the learning takes place not in the Beit Midrash. There's an outdoors dimension to it, nature, the presence of God in nature, something really, really very beautiful, and it as a balance to the way in which we traditionally look at Jewish life. And what I was saying before is that mysticism has had a greater influence on Jewish life than philosophy, with all of the Rambam's great achievements, I must say. Although to me, and to some extent, there's a negative side to that as well, but that's not for now. Rabbi Shimon was sitting engaged in Torah on the night when the bride is joined with her husband. What's the night when the bride is joined with the husband? Shavuos. It's the marriage ceremony. Who is the bride and who is the husband? Who is the bride? The bride could be Israel. The husband could be God. The bride could be the Shekhinah, the feminine dimension of God. The husband could be the Holy One, blessed be He, Tiferet. The bride could be the oral Torah. The groom could be the written Torah. All of these options are possible, and they're embedded in the text. Where do we hear about the bride? You all hear and you know about the bride. It draws from this very literature.
Lecha Dodi.
Lecha Dodi is written by Solomon Alkabetz. We'll hear about him more about him in a moment.
Shir HaShirim.
What's that? Excuse me?
Shir HaShirim, you have the bride.
Oh, yes, we have it in Shir HaShirim. Exactly. So the Song of Songs became itself a guidebook, a spiritual guidebook, by the way, interpreted by philosophers and mystics alike as having to do with the relationship with God. The church and the church interpreted that way, and the rabbis interpreted that way as a love story. But part of the love story here is between Israel and the Torah. That's also a dimension of this love relationship. So the Rabbi Shimon and his friends, the Chevraya, they are the Chevraya. They're busy on the night of Shavuot preparing for the celebration of a wedding that's taking place. The wedding that we call revelation. When you hear the word revelation, there's something frightening about it. God is intruding on the mountain and the mountain is shuddering. But what's the revelation? It's a wedding. And rather than thunder, it's the klezmer playing dancing music. I mean, in other words, And it's the poetry that we bring to a wedding. For we have learned, all those companions, the Chevraya, initiated into the bridal palace, right? They've been initiated by their studies of mysticism, need on that night, when the bride is destined the next day to be under the canopy with her husband, so that when Shekhinah is going to enter into the canopy with Tiferet, with the masculine dimension of God. I know this sounds heretical to talk about this in Judaism, but this is an aspect of Judaism, to be with her all night, delighting with her in her adornments in which she is arrayed, engaging in Torah, from Torah to prophets, from prophets to writings, midrashic renderings of verses and mysteries of wisdom. These are her adornments and finery. So how do the Chevraya adorn the bride? Because the bride is being prepared by the bridesmen. They're the bridesmen. They're the companions. They prepare her to be able to greet, to be brought into the wedding canopy to be for the marriage ceremony. They prepare her by peppering her with teachings. And the teachings are a chain of teachings that bring together, that sew together all aspects of Judaism and Jewish learning. The Torah, the prophets, the legal aspect, the Talmud, all are brought together because the great goal of the mystics is to bring about unity. God itself represents the unity of all, the oneness of being. The great sort of focus, the meditation of the mystic is on the notion of oneness. Let me say something simple that I think, is worthwhile for people to consider. Some of you may be meditators, so I don't know that I have anything to teach you because, I need to learn from you. But when those of us who engage in prayer, so and this is a prayer that all of us say, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Right? What do you think about when you proclaim that God is one? What does it mean to you? Because it seems to me that that's a secret of not only of religion, it's the secret, the sort of the social secret of what can be a transformational notion in society. The idea that really we all have one God, or we all come from one human being, or that we share with one another, not only with other human beings, but with all aspects of nature. We're all, it's a continuum. That's what creation means. Creation, it's not about that I can prove that. It's about the fact that we were created, meaning all of us emerged and we're all linked to one another. I don't have to tell you that, science tells you that. How come we don't know that in the way in which we relate to the world around us? So oneness is the meditative goal of the mystics in which they engage in that night. That's what they're dreaming of. What are they dreaming of? That the Torah will be one. What prevents oneness in the world? Because there's a moral dimension to mystical philosophy. Evil. The evil shatters the oneness. That's why this is the myth of Kabbalah, right? It's the background story. That's why the Shekhinah, right? The feminine aspect of God, and Tiferet, the Holy One, blessed be He, can't be together because there's evil that separates them. What is evil in the Kabbalah? Separation, division, right? It's not about distinction. Distinction is one thing. Separation means pulling things apart. Are we in this world to bring things together or to separate things? How do we look upon ourselves as Jews? Are we part of humanity or we are apart from humanity? Or are we both at the same time, but we maintain a sense that we are connected? In other words, it's against the notion of disconnection. There's something that fundamentally links us to one another. And that's what's being celebrated. The giving of the Torah, think about it this way. The Torah is the intrusion of the divine into the world. It's the meeting of the heavenly world with the earthly world. And we are sort of granted the opportunity to be the bearers of that tradition that focuses on the potential for unity, of the spirit participating in a life in the material physical world itself. That's a grand sort of responsibility that we take upon ourselves, or that was granted to us when the Torah was given to us. All right, so let's read a little bit more. She enters escorted by her maidens, the angels, standing above, standing above, where am I? Standing above their heads, adorned by them. She rejoices with them the whole night. The next day she enters the canopy only with them, and they are called members of the canopy. B'nai Chupata, all right? This is the B'nai Heichala, the members of the divine retinue. They are these companions. They're now the attendants. They are the chuppah attendants. And you have to think about this, that their teachings of Torah are the gems that adorn the bride. As soon as she enters the canopy, the Blessed Holy One inquires about them, right? Who are them? Who are they, these accompanied? Why are they here? Blesses them and crowns them with bridal crowns. Happy is their share. Ashrei Chel Kahon, right? Rabbi Shimon and all the companions were singing the song of Torah. A wonderful, wonderful line. What do you mean singing the song of Torah? They weren't singing the trup. I mean, laning. They understood that the Torah is poetry. The Netziv, the head of the yeshiva in Volozhin, right? Bialik's teacher, right? He, in his introduction to his commentary on the Torah, writes, Kol HaTorah Kula Shira. The entire Torah is itself poetry. So the companions, like the Therapeutae, were caught in the song of the Spirit that elevated them, and the song of rejoicing of the bride and the groom. And what happens as they were singing? Innovating words of Torah. It's fabulous. It means that as they were singing, there are chidushei Torah. Novel. They were adding to Torah. Torah was growing with them, with new ideas, each one of them. Rabbi Shimon and all other companions rejoiced. Rabbi Shimon said, "My children, happy is your share. But tomorrow the bride will enter the canopy only with you." All right, so this is a new passage. For all those arranging her adornments tonight, rejoicing with her, will be recorded and inscribed in the book of memory. Sefer HaZichronot. All right, the sort of a celestial book. The Blessed Holy One blesses them with 70 blessings. Again, we have 70 blessings. That's sort of an accounting of it's 7 times 10. There are 10 sefirot, the 10 emanations, right? And so it's sort of a whole magical association, as well as what I said earlier, that it's a universal number, 70 blessings and crowns of the supernal world. Rabbi Shimon opens saying, heaven declares the glory of God. We have already established this verse, meaning that this verse has been interpreted by the rabbis many times, and we know that there's a traditional interpretation. But at this time, that's always an introduction to saying, but we have an innovative way. In other words, the task of the mystic is to take apart the verse in another different way and read it in their own symbolic mode. But at this time, when the bride is aroused to enter the canopy the next day, she is arrayed and illumined with her adornments. See, so together with the companions, rejoicing with her that whole night, while she rejoices with them. By the way, one of the things that's going on here is there's something redemptive, because the Shekhinah has the not so pleasant task of being enmeshed in the world. She's part of the lower aspect of the divine that actually engages with the world itself, which means that there are forces, negative forces, like the bad forces in the world are always making a beeline to diminish her. So what happens is that when this celebration comes, every Shabbos, whenever there's an opportunity, she feels relieved, and the forces of evil are relaxed. Especially on Shabbos, that's what happens. Shabbat Shalom means there's no competition. People are not engaged in the enmity, hostility has been reduced in the world. We hope. The greeting that we give one another is Shalom. So the Shekhinah, sort of this very dainty, vulnerable presence, can emerge. And she emerges because she's accompanied by those who revere her and who bring her in all her glory, together with the Holy One, Tiferet. the sun, the moon is brought to the sun, to speak in sort of these classic terms. I mean, that's what the redemptive moment is. We have already established this first, but at this time when the bride is aroused to enter the canopy, the next day she's arrayed, etc., etc., etc. The following day, countless troops, soldiers, and camps, talking about angels, retinues of angels, assemble with her. And she waits together with all of them for each and every one who adorned her that night, this night. You have to have a little bit of an imagination to read this and study this material. Not a little bit, have a good imagination. As soon as they join together and she sees her husband, what is written? Heaven declares the glory of God. So now comes the mystical interpretation. What's heaven? Heaven is the groom entering the canopy. Shamayim is the groom. That's the divine. That's the masculine. Misaprim, Hashamayim misaprim. Sapir means sparkle. It's a sapphire, right? It sparkles. So the groom comes with radiance, sparkling, or there's radiating from one end of the universe to the other. That is God. When God created the world, there was undifferentiated light, which meant that there was no obstacle to perception. And perception was a unified. There was one perception. You apprehended the all. So in the moment of unity, there are no divisions. When there are no divisions, you see it all. So that's the radiating light of the groom that's brought in. The glory of God, Hashemayim misaprim kavod el, the glory of God, glory of the bride. El is the bride. That's the Shekhinah, who is called God. El, as it is written, God rages every day. Why does God rage every day? Because of the evil surrounding and the frustration and the sense of being attacked. Every day of the year, she is called God, El. But now that she has entered the canopy, she is called glory, kavod, as well as God. Glory upon glory, radiance upon radiance, dominion upon dominion. So Hashamayim misaprim kavod El. The heavens are radiating on the glory of God. This is the marriage. This is actually the consummation of the marriage. The groom radiating into the bride and forming a unity. Hashamayim misaprim kavod El. I don't know if you've ever thought of interpreting the verse that way. All right. She is called God, but now she, etc. Then at the moment when heaven enters the canopy, coming to illumine her, all those companions who adorned her are designated there by name, as is written. The sky proclaims the work of God's hands, the work of his hands, masters of the covenant with the bride, her partners, and talking about Baalei Brit, okay, and we don't have to spend much more time. The masters of the covenant, those are the accompanying bridesmen, are called the work of his hands. As it is said, the work of his hands established it. This is the covenant sealed in a man's flesh. Okay, let's let that aside, this sort of last section. So this spiritual experience is celebrated by the mystics on Shavuot night. And you have the sense that on Shavuot night, we have a special responsibility to be, it's as if we have to spend the night studying Torah in preparation for the moment at which we'll stand with God at Sinai. Because standing at Sinai didn't happen, it's gonna happen. Like I was when I was a child, I don't know about you, but I was told that at midnight, the heavens open and God emerges from the heavens. So I used to campaign to be up at midnight to see, is there a break in the clouds? Can we see the divine? This is an anticipation that we have. There's a breakthrough that occurs on Shavuot day, and that we're actors in that drama that allow the possibility of heaven and earth to come together, and we can facilitate that unity. How can you sleep on the night before that occasion? In other words, you're filled with trepidation and a sense of anticipation, and that you need to prepare, and that you have to be ready to face what could be a transformative experience. So that's what the Chevraya, that's how they came. That's how they came to their Shavuot. Now, some years later, in the 16th century, there was a mystic whose name was Joseph Caro. But some of you know, do you know who Joseph Caro was? Tevra, you know who he was? Excuse me, Yiftach?
Shulchan Aruch.
He was the author of the Code of Jewish Law. All right.
And Beit Yosef.
So Joseph Caro was a very interesting personality. I want you to sort of understand and grasp the dynamics. What I would say is the complicated nature of the religious personality. No different from the complicated nature of all of your personalities. In other words, no one is unidimensional. At least, it's not necessary to be unidimensional, because Caro, who was the greatest legal authority of his day, was also the greatest mystic of his day. And there's a wonderful book that's still a classic. I recommend it to all of you, written by Tzvi Wroblewski, who was my teacher at the Hebrew University. It's called Joseph Caro, Lawyer and Mystic. It's a great book, and it introduces you to that whole culture, the mystical culture of Safed in the 16th century. And Caro had the distinction not only of being an active mystic, but he kept a mystical diary. The diary is called Magid Mesharim. All right, this edition was published in Lublin in 1646. Right, and in the introduction to the Lublin edition of the Magid Mesharim, there's a letter. You know who the letter is from? From Solomon Alkabetz, the author of Lecha Dodi. Why? Because he was Caro's chevruta. They learned together. They lived together, first in Greece and then in Thessaloniki and Salonika. And then they went to live in Tzfat, and they transformed Judaism and Jewish life. All right, in other words, this is what happens. I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to read the text. This text is reported in two different places. It occurs, as I said, in the introduction to Caro's Magid, and it's also recorded by Isaiah Horowitz in his work, The Shnei Luchot HaBrit. And it's presented by Alkabetz as an authoritative account, an authoritative and accurate account of what occurred. Now, background. Caro, the lawyer, experienced what we would call some form of automatic speech, meaning that he would get himself into a type of trance and a voice would come and speak through him. He intermittently referred to this voice from heaven, which didn't sound at all like Caro. It just came and spoke through him, right? He intermittently referred to it as a Magid, as a preacher, of which there were, in Tzfat, had many of these Magidim in those days, and as the Mishnah. Now it turns out, many of you know this, that if you transpose the letters of Mishnah, what do you get? Neshama, soul. So the voice that spoke through Caro was the voice of his soul. His inner voice, the inner voice from heaven, was his inner voice. And now what happened was, for a couple of centuries, even to this day, traditional Jews denied that Joseph Caro could have written such a work, or could have been himself experienced anything of this sort. Because how could the master of Talmud and law be so crazy? And this is just wild. It's just wild. A voice speaking through him and so all this stuff. What is he? I mean, hallucinating. Now, what happened is that in 1533 in Salonika, the Caro and Alkabetz gathered together a group of their friends and decided they were going to stay up all night and study on Shavuot. And in the middle of the night, at midnight, the voice came to visit everybody. And Alkabetz reports they fell to the floor. The group in attendance. Now it turns out it was only 8 people. They didn't have a minyan, which was a problem. But 8 people were there and they all heard the voice. Alkabetz records the teachings or the chastisements of that voice, who first celebrates them and then tells them, that there's something missing and shares with them a sense of loss and says that they all have to get up and go to live in Eretz Yisrael. They have to make Aliyah, and that becomes the dream of the group. And they all take a pledge that they will do so. Now, what happened was that the pledge, however, was not binding. There was no minyan or whatever. So as luck would have it, they lived in Salonika, so they had a second night of Shavuot. And so too on the second night, the Maggid comes again. Delivers the same sort of similar form of speech. You understand what's going on here, that, you know, this is a psychological force within Karo that emerges. It's an alter ego to Karo that emerges in public as a type of independent voice, but it actually, you know, it's part and parcel of who he is, and it reflects his inner aspirations or his inner doubts. I mean, if you read Wroblewski does a psychological analysis of Joseph Karo that's brilliant in terms of how he could be the author of this work. And in the end, again, the Maggid elicits a promise that the group, this time there was a minyan, that they would all go and live in Palestine. They would be a community and take care of one another. Karo tells them, don't worry about material wealth or possessions. We have each other, we'll take care of one another, and that's not what's important. And they are prepared to go and live in Eretz Yisrael. In the meantime, there's a plague that strikes in Salonika. Karo loses his wife and 3 of his children. He had 4 children. And he's in depression, and he's sick, and he's near death. And he's moved from Salonika. 2 years later, Alkabetz decides to visit him. And during those 2 years, he had no visits from the preacher. When Alkabetz came to visit him, his old chavruta, the preacher reappeared, the Maggid reappeared, and Karo apparently came back to life. And in the end, the 2 of them made their trip to Eretz Yisrael. Karo remarried, had a new family, and the rest is history. The Jewish community of Tzfat became the center of Jewish mysticism and of a revolutionary community. Isaac Luria came there, Cordovero was there, so there were Spanish mystics. Luria was an Ashkenazi, and they regenerated Judaism. Every generation, you should know this, needs a creative force to regenerate the doctrines. Maimonides did it through philosophy, the Hasidim did it through Hasidism, and I don't know what's doing it today, but that's the question. That's the question that we have. So the Karo represented the fully integrated personality, where halacha on the one side, statutory law, and Kabbalah, mysticism, and poetry and prose resided comfortably, not only comfortably, were intertwined in this one personality who was a fountain of inspiration. All right, so this text written by Alkabetz remains embedded in classic Jewish sources and becomes the inspiration for enacting the practice of Tikkun Leyl Shavuot. It emerges from Alkabetz and it spreads. And it becomes then the dominant way, because there's no event, there's no special food on Shavuos except what developed in Europe later on to eat blintzes, dairy products. Believe me, the Torah didn't say you have to eat blintzes. And the way in which this is memorialized and ritualized is in Sephardic ritual. Now, you should know that Sephardic Jews have a natural disposition to mysticism. Mysticism is woven into the traditional prayers of Sephardim in a much more widespread manner than among the Eastern European Ashkenazim. That our Ashkenazic mode of life was fortunately or unfortunately, right, it experienced an enlightenment, and the enlightenment led to a certain cynicism regarding the mystical tradition, and the Talmudic aspects also militated against overt mystical expression. But the Sephardic life, which I'm sorry for this type of generalizations, reflects sort of much more of a natural mode of life and much more emotional, open to the emotions in a very sort of real way. Has embraced mystical doctrine, mystical practices, and mystical teachings. So, if you go to a Sephardic shul on Shavuos morning, and when they open up the Torah, they recite a Ketubah. The Ketubah is a marriage contract. The traditional text, it's on pages 9 and 10. The traditional text is between God and Israel. On page 9 is a modern version. Yeah, go to 9. Go to 9. The next page. Giselle, the next page, the picture. Yeah, this isn't, yeah, to me, this is page 9, the prior pages. All right, this is page 9. So that's a David Moss. David Moss, who's a modern Israeli artist, created this ketubah with verses around the edges, and the text that's in the middle is on the next 2 pages. I just, in case some of you are interested in the Hebrew. So the Hebrew is a poem, a long poem in the form of, it's a contract in the form of a poem that was written by Israel Najara. Israel Najara was the greatest poet of 16th century Tzfat. And Najara wrote, no, he didn't write, he didn't have, no, but all right. He wrote Yaribon, if I'm not mistaken. So so this Hebrew poem is based on the idea of the ketubah, and it's the classical ketubah that's read, and you can find a translation in a Spanish and Portuguese prayer book where this is recited. Now, the ketubah that I have in my possession, which is on page 6, we can go back to page 6. So it's here, some of you can see it. You see it in the picture here. It was written in Azerbaijan. Saul, did you buy this for me years ago? Do you remember?
I might have, yeah.
Yeah, I once sent Saul to an auction to buy something for me. I think it was you. Anyway, so this was written by a rabbi in Azerbaijan. It's very folky, but it preserves another text of the marriage contract, and it's the marriage of Israel and the Torah. All right, so I just want to focus on a couple of sentences in this. I mean, you can read it on your own. It's quite beautiful in terms of its expression. All right, turn to page 8. All right, actually on page 7. Look on the dowry. This dowry that the bride brought with her as an emblem and a sign from her father, the master of all wonders, a heart to know, ears to hear, and eyes to see. That's her dowry. She further brought to him, to Israel, observable currency to benefit from its yield. What's that currency? 248 positive commandments with all of their details, which if a person observes, they shall live by them. She further brought to him garments and accessories for bed, for adornment, 365 negative commandments with all of their punishments, rules by which one should not live. All in all, between the ketubah of their mystery and the depth of their honor, fear God and observe God's commandments, for this is the duty of every human. So there's what we see here is that there's a love relationship that's created between Israel and Torah. What I can't emphasize enough, that when you see revelation as a loving expression, it's not the explosion of God with and Charlton Heston on Mount Sinai with the thunder and lightning. It's the embrace of two lovers. The nature of Jewish religious life changes completely. Rather than be authoritarian, imposed, coercive, it's something loving and giving, living and growing, and something that's potentially endless. And the mitzvot are opportunities to express one's love or one's commitment, one's involvement, one's engagement. This is about engagement. It's not about fear. So this is another dimension. I don't want to disregard, you need both, but this emerges, it seems to me, in a very powerful way out of this literature. Turn the page. I love the conditions of the marriage. So that the conditions are that he will not marry another woman in addition to her from among the secular wisdoms. No competitors. Just from her he shall call out in the busy streets. For unlike the Egyptian women or the Hebrew women, all right? That he will not go on the road and abandon her. I don't think of this literally, but I mean, I think because it's sort of a wonderful expression. You have to be loyal to the Torah. You're in love with the Torah. That he will not go on the road and abandon her, but will always have her accompany him, lest he die in battle and another take her. That he will not divorce her all his living days, and even after he dies, as he will instruct his children and his household, etc., etc. The next paragraph. The inheritance engraved as per the practice of law from the good reserved for the righteous, which no eye has beheld. Let us ascend and gain possession of it. The settling in Eretz Israel will take place when the temple and mountain of God will be rebuilt by the Master, the Lord God of Israel. So there's something messianic about this, right? There was something messianic about the companions. They're bringing about redemption. That's called tikkun. Tikkun is repair. Tikkun is a step towards redemption. It's the way in which we put the world back together. The world is broken. The task of the religious personality is to figure out how to make unities. Some of those unities are going to be small. The mitzvah observance is small ways of bringing this little thing together with that. I'm doing an action. I'm using my feet to walk to help someone out, so that I'm bringing together my feet and the idea of help and the other person. So all these actions, all these commandments, they become guideposts in terms of how to utilize, how you yourself become a vehicle for bringing about some connection between disparate parts of existence, so that creation doesn't exist coming apart from one another. The scientists tell us that the world is infinitely expanding, all right? So the task, that's what's going on scientifically. Religiously, what we have to do is create this type of infinite aggregation, if we can do so, in the sense that it brings about an intensity of the possibility of some sensing the potential that we have in being one, that we actually share something in common. I don't know how many of you listened this morning to NPR and heard that wonderful report about the Seder in the senior citizens' home in Jerusalem by Estrin. It was a wonderful report where the Arab woman and the Haredim sat and celebrated Pesach together, along with secular Israelis. So you need moments. You need moments. These are vulnerable moments that we're in, where we understand that we're no different from anybody else. Halavai, that some of our leaders might also understand that there's something here that is telling us we need to sense our unity with the world and with nature and our responsibility for one another. That's what's going on Shavuos. Shavuos is a meditation on the possibility of bringing think of it, of bringing the Torah Sheba'al Peh, human teachings, together with the divine teachings. Meaning that we shatter through barriers and we create the possibility of seeing things as one and not as completely two separate domains. That's an extremely powerful image. Let's skip a few pages. Obviously, let me say a word. Actually, you already know this. About why. If you look on page 12, you'll see source number 6 and number 7 that says that the reason there's no dates for the Torah is because because it should be new. It should be like it was given to you anew every day. But really embedded in the idea of being anew every day is a great idea. It's a secret of Jewish learning and of education, it seems to me. And that's this teaching on source number 11. It's a favorite of mine. It's a comment by Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin. He was the student of the Gaon of Vilna. He founded the greatest yeshiva, greatest academy in Lithuania, where, as I've told you many times, Bialik studied and Rabbi Kook studied. And Rabbi Chaim wrote in this commentary on the ethics of the sages on a passage in the first chapter that says, Havei mitabek ba'afar ragleihem, which translates, in the first part of the statement says, Aseh beitcha beit vad l'chachamim, make your house a meeting place for the wise, and you shall wallow in the dust of their feet. So at least it's usually understood. But Reb Chaim says, maybe not. Look at the third paragraph, source number 11. It is prohibited for a student to accept the teachings of his or her rabbi when she or he has difficulty with them. Prohibited. In other words, Reb Chaim says, as a teacher of Judaism, I tell you, if you have a question, you can't be passive in the way in which you receive the teachings of your rabbi or your teacher. Think about a university instructor starting the class and saying, I'm now sort of, I'm giving you the task to all of you, that all of you need to challenge me if you have a question. Don't let me get away with anything. That's what this is about. It is prohibited for a student to accept the teachings of his or her rabbi when she or he has difficulty with them. At times, the truth will lie with the student, just as a small tree can ignite the large one. That is what is meant by, may your home be a meeting place for sages, wallow in the dust of their feet. Mit abek, which is dust from avak, become dirty, is related here in Reb Chaim's interpretation to vayeyavek ishimo. He's relating the root to a different verb, and a man wrestled with him. The angel wrestled with Jacob, which relates to a struggle of warfare, which is a war of mitzvah. So the jihad, the milchemet mitzvah in the Beit Midrash is the war of ideas, the war between the teacher and the student, the respectful war between the teacher and the student. So too are we positioned against our holy teachers who are deceased and whose souls are heavenly. He says, don't tell me that if it's written in a book that you have no right to question it. So it's written in the book, but if it's wrong, it's wrong. So the fact that it's a revered teacher who wrote that book and you have it on your shelf and you use it all the time doesn't mean that you might not have some innovative insight that allows you to understand what's lacking in that interpretation, in that book. I'm telling you, this is an approach to wisdom, to education. It's not just about Torah, right? Which relates to the struggle. This is a struggle. It's a struggle for ideas. So too we positioned against our holy teachers. In this way, through those books in our homes become gathering places for these wise teachers, right? If you have a library and all you do is have the library and you look at it, oh, it looks nice. Oh, look how many books I have. Oh, and they're old books. Oh, beautiful. No, the idea of having a library is that you're engaged with the library. The books are alive. You're referring to those ideas. You're banging those ideas. You know, Steinsaltz would say that when he took the Talmud off, when he took a Talmud off the shelf, he kissed it. When he put the Talmud back on the shelf, he kissed it. But when he opened it up, he beat it up. Okay, so that's the point. Are we beating up our books and the ideas that are in them? We were also admonished and permitted to struggle and battle with or against their teachings, offer answers to their queries, and not show them any favor, only to love the truth. However, with it all, right? Don't get arrogant. Don't get uppity. Don't think that you know it all. We must be prudent, not to speak arrogantly or haughtily when arguing against a particular teaching and imagine that we are as learned as our teacher or the author who we critique. One should know in one's heart that there are times that one doesn't understand the teachings and intentions of the teacher, writer, right? You always have to preserve that doubt. There should be a degree of ambivalence in your approach. Therefore, the argument ought to be pursued with profound humility, thinking, I'm not worthy. It is the Torah, and I must learn. This is the meaning of mitabek, struggle, challenge, but on the condition that is in the dust of their feet, with humility and submission, and to argue before them from below, sitting on the ground. My friend who went to visit this guru in Egypt, in India, right? So when he came there, so the guru got off his seat and sat down on the ground to meet him. I mean, that's how a teacher meets a student. It's an amazing way to meet a student. But this is the mode of learning. This is the mode of chidush. So this is sort of the great chutzpah of the Jewish tradition. It's true that the Torah was given to us by God, right? But it's also true that we can adorn that Torah. We can innovate in that Torah. We can add to it our understanding. We can, as the therapeutic did, find allegorical meaning, inner interpretation, see it as poetry, not just as a series of laws or just simply as narrative. Try to understand the symbolic dimension of it. try to understand what relevance it might have and how it could educate us to values. What are the values that emanate from these teachings? And understand that this book is not just a book on the shelf. It's a book that we're engaged with. It has a life. It's living. We celebrate with it. Who else carries around a book and kisses it and dances with it? I was going to say before about a marriage contract. I once had a wedding years ago with a Moroccan Chazan, very famous Moroccan Chazan, Chaim. He used to be invited by the King of Morocco every year to perform in the palace. So he was older than I. He was a wonderful human being. And as we were walking through the door, I made a sign that he should walk first. He refused to walk first. He said, "Kvod Harav, the Rav has to go first." Okay. So I couldn't fight with him. So we were under the chuppah, and we came to the reading of the Ketubah, which is in the middle of the ceremony. He took the marriage contract and he chanted it. And it changed my life because I understood something about the marriage contract. We think that the marriage contract is a legal contract. We think that it's about the imposition of clauses and money and all this. And we don't really understand that, because I say to myself, how many attorneys go to court and sing the contract to the judge in court? I mean, who does that? In other words, the marriage contract is a celebration. Luke understood that. From that moment on, I mean, it's a Moroccan, it's more than that, because Shalom Sabar showed me how it's actually built into the Moroccan tradition that Ketubot should be sung, right? So from that point on, if I ever have a wedding where they ask me to read the traditional Ketubah, I chant it. I have a chant through Eshet Chayil. It's a celebration. It's a love document. It's a legal love document, right? Heschel would always talk about the need to bring poetry and prose together. Agarata, right? Bialik, Agarata and Halacha. That's the problem. Rabbi Cook, the same. We think in the bicameral and in a split with a split mind. The religious tradition, from this mystical perspective, aims at bringing the different dimensions together. And since we're talking about poetry, if you have another minute, let's conclude this evening with Yehuda Amichai, source number 12. Who wrote this poem for Shavuot? My father was God and didn't know it, okay? How many of you have that experience? He gave me the 10 commandments, not in thunder and not in anger, not in fire and not in a cloud, but gently and with love. It sort of reminds me of God's chastisement of Elijah. The cold, right? I'm not in the thunder, I'm not in the earthquake, right? I'm not in the fire, right? But I'm in the cold Mamadaka, in the still small voice. He added caresses and tender words. Instead of thou must, would you, and please. And chanted, remember and keep, right? Remember, v'chadodi, shamor v'zachor. So, and chanted, instead of shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad, so according to Amichai, shamor v'zachor b'nigun echad, with the same tune. And pleaded and wept quietly between one commandment and the next. Thou shalt not take the name of thy Lord in vain. And he repeated it, shalt not take, not in vain, softly, softening. Please don't bear false witness against your neighbor. And he hugged me tight and whispered in my ear, thou shalt not steal, shalt not commit adultery, shalt not kill. And he laid the palms of his wide open hands on my head with the Yom Kippur blessing, right? To bless his son with the blessings. He was a traditional Jew, right? So he gave him the Birkat HaYeladim. And what did he do? What did he honor, love, that thy days may be long upon the earth, right? Honor, love. What was he channeling here, Amichai? Kaberet avicha vetimecha. Honor thy father and thy mother. But Amichai has transformed the commandment to honor father and mother, honor parents, to honor and love. Not just parents, honor, love. In other words, Torah, the commandments. What's the central commandment? Honor, love. And the voice of my father, white as his hair. Then he turned his face to me one last time, as on the day he died in my arms, and said, I would like to add 2 more commandments. Wonderful, wonderful commandments. The 11th commandment, thou shalt not change. I love you, my son. Right? I love you who you are and who you become. And the 12th commandment, Thou shalt change. You will change. And I know that you're going to change, and I encourage your change. You don't have to be whom I wanted you to be, or you don't have to be the image that you, the one image. You can be beyond who you are. Grow, change, learn in life. Thus spoke my father. I mean, it's wonderful if you can imagine getting this type of send-off from a parent who has confidence in you to be able to grow and develop into your own, while at the same time understanding that in your growth and change, not to experience that as a threat against them, because at the same time that you're growing and changed, it's grounded and it's anchored in the tradition that they've given you. That's the problem. Parents resent their children who go off and form a different life, and we're unable at times to be able to communicate that the differences that we have are all grounded in what they taught us, and that we have an anchor. And at the same time that we have an anchor, we also have we have sails, so that we're moving beyond who we were, and that they set us on this mission. Thus spoke my father, and he turned and walked away and disappeared into his strange distances. So Shavuot in a different light. Shavuot as a wedding, Shavuot as a marriage celebration, Shavuot as a love fest between Israel and the Torah, between Israel and God, between Israel and truth, in the pursuit of truth. One last teaching. The last two words, this is something that the Shalah says, Isaiah Horowitz. He notes that the 10 Commandments in Exodus, I think, have 620 letters. And this last 7 letters, so that 620 is 613. 613 correspond to the 613 Commandments, and the 7 correspond to the 7 Noahide laws that all humanity. So it's his way of saying the universal law. And he notes that the last 7 letters of the 10 Commandments spell the words Asher l'reacha, unto your neighbor. So the foundation of Judaism, the foundation of the 10 Commandments, the foundation according to Yehuda Amichai is Asher l'reacha. It's the moral commitment and obligation that we have to our neighbor to try to create a world in which not only can we tolerate one another, but where we sense a connectedness to one another. Asher l'reacha, so that the stranger who lives by your side becomes your neighbor and someone that you can feel a sense of proximity and continuity and closeness with. Thank you. I want to thank you all. I hope that we can continue this learning. I'm thinking about a new series, certainly in the fall. I don't know what will happen in between. Let's. I know the one thing that's missing, and I feel badly about it, is that you give me an hour and a half, I speak for an hour and a half, and we don't have time for an exchange. So I'd like to think about that, about what we can do. Maybe someone has ideas, and I would even entertain the possibility of having a session where we just have questions and discussion if people would like that. So be well, take care of yourselves, and get tested if you haven't been tested yet. And hopefully soon we'll be able to celebrate together. Shalom, shalom. All the best.
All right, thank you, Chaim. It was really wonderful. So nice to see you from 3,000 miles away. The distance collapses. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. It's good. Listen, it's years. It's also years that come together.
Yeah, and years and years and years. And without this, I would have never been able to go because it would have been at UCLA.
Right, right.
So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sameach.
Sameach. Oh, Shavuot says it. We still have some
Wonderful. Yes.
week and a half, but
I just
appreciate it. Learn a little bit. Ruth.
Incredible.
Thank you so much.
Chaim, I learned a lot, Chaim. And thank you for the Yehuda Amichai poem, which, by the way, I read to my father at Seder a couple of years ago. And this year I read it in his memory.
Wow. All right.
So I just love that poem.
I mean, I know that it's so wonderful. We start off with the therapeutic who are singing together, and we end with Yehuda Amichai's poem. I mean,
Yes.
see that's the nature of that, at least what ties all these aspects of Shavuot together. Really wonderful.
Chaim, thank you. And Chaim, may you have Ruach Chaim always and have masters in your home.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. It's a pleasure to study with you.
Norman.
One last word about the Omer of today, the
Yes.
Hod of Yesod. Maybe a couple of insights of the day
Yes.
that is so special with you.
Which one is today? Yesod?
I think today is number 40, isn't it? The Hod of Yesod.
Yes, Hod Yesod. I must say that I don't have an insight. I can't. I don't want to disappoint you, but
Rabbi Simon Jacobson, who wrote this.
Yes,
beautiful
what did he write?
book,
Yes.
He writes, exercise for the day. When praying, acknowledge God specifically for helping you bond with others.
Oh,
that's
all right.
Very
That
nice.
helps us. That's exactly what we were saying.
That's what we did today.
So let me say something about that, which is that if you look, I think you can look online. Look online to the Sephardic prayer book, the Spanish and Portuguese prayer book, and I think and Eastern. It's the same. The blessing for in the Amida, Barech Aleinu, bring upon us the blessing. It's a paragraph in which we talk about rain. So the winter paragraph that's recited by Sephardim includes prayer for sustenance and for healing world from all plague, etc. That I think it really encapsulates.
You want to put it back?
Excuse me. Maybe I could send it out to people a copy of that Barech Aleinu. So what I do, I change it because in the winter you say Tein Talu Matar. Now we say Tein Baracha. But the body of the prayer itself is very beautiful, and it's a universal. Sabat Haolam. You have to satisfy the world, bring food to the world, bring healing to the world. It's not just about Jews. That's important. That in our prayers, I like Ron. That's why that was important, Jacobson. In our prayers, we understand that it's an opportunity for us to think about others, not just about ourselves. Okay. Thanks for the Hod. Thank you.
Happy Yom Yerushalayim.
Okay, that's my next.
Oh, Yom Yerushalayim? Okay. Chodesh Tov.
Hi, Danielle. It's Friday.
Thank you, Chaim. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just for you, Chaim, I put the Mikdash in the background.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Holy. So everyone knows. So Jerome is one of those Third Temple period people.
Oh yeah. Well, Third Temple.
Time. It's time.
Not a problem.
Okay. All right. That's great.
Good night. Have a lovely night.
Shalom, shalom.
Ben-Gurion's not the Mashiach problem.
Chaim.
Bye.
Regards to Doreen.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Take good care.
Regards to your kids.
Thanks.
Bye, Chaim.
Hi. Eleanor from BJ. Roli Torah Rabbi Akiva's store.
Perla, the program the other night on aging and COVID, in the age of COVID, was great.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I heard that too.
Thank you,
Good.
Chaim. Good to see you. Thank you.
Yeah, Matt. Hi.
Rabbi Chaim,
How you doing? Wait, what's that? I'm reading. Yes.
it's me, Eleanor.
Oh, Eleanor. Hi, Eleanor. I'm reading the story.
Take your time.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I'm muted.
Rabbi Chaim,
Uh-huh.
פנינים, שיצאו מפיך נכנסו אל ליבי. Thank you.
Wow. Wow. No. Hi, Sonia. Hi. Oh.
Fine, thank you. And next time you talk to David Ben-Gurion, let him know that the United Kingdom also has a chief rabbi.
Okay.
I wanted to mention, and it refers to your last lesson as well as today,
Yes.
that one Shavuot, when I lived in Tzfat, I did an all-night Torah study, and we were at the synagogue in Tzfat, which has the oldest Torah in Israel. And I was there with a friend. We were there at about 3 in the morning. We're sitting in the courtyard, and a couple of Hasidim came by speaking Yiddish, and they came in, and the guys from America, I could tell by the accent, were saying, "No, let's not go in." It turned out to be the person who is going to be the next macher in the Hasidim from the most religious group, and he was contemplating. He said, "No, we enter here. It's got the oldest Torah in Israel. This is our place." We went in there, and he had a discussion about thinking of joining the Israeli army.
Really?
And I was really thinking last time when you were talking that I think you missed the boat. I think that the Jews that were the kibbutznikim, when Rabbi Kook said that moving to Israel is a mitzvah greater than all the other mitzvahs, it really spoke to me, having made Aliyah. And I thought that the kibbutznikim and the other soldiers that fought for the land of Israel, including Jerusalem, are part of the religious Jews, no matter whether they call themselves
that's
religious
what Rabbi Kook taught. I don't deny that. I don't deny that. But I do think that when it's taken, if it's taken to an extreme, it leads to some religious distortions. Because his son took it to the extreme and said that a tank is holy. A tank isn't holy. It kills people. I mean, that's that. You know, the people can be holy, not the tank. That's the mistake of attributing holiness. That's what I'm talking about, to a thing. You know that, so Rabbi, I don't know. I don't think the father would have agreed with what the son did, but he laid the groundwork for that sort of extreme conclusion. And there was a certain Hegelian determinism. In other words, what secular Israelis is, you're religious whether you think you're religious or not. Now, there's something nice about that, but there's also something disrespectful about that. The person you're telling that to says, "Don't tell me I'm religious. I don't want you to tell me that." But Rav Kook, Kook was sort of saying, "You don't know because God's really in control." I mean, you have to. I mean, you have to see that he's not. There's a side that's not so pleasant here. In other words, the independent individual is removed. That's why the kibbutznikim are holy people, because it's not really them who is working. God is working through them. So that's not an attractive.
They also left.
Following the tradition of discussion and with kol hakavod, and at the same time disagreeing, because healing the splits is what it's all about.
You're right, and he did something that he did it actually with one of the Haredi rabbis. They went on a trip to all the kibbutzim in the Galil, and the kibbutzim kosher. It's remembered. I mean, I don't know how many people are alive today who remember that, but it had an enormous impact. You're right. He and his whole approach. He was interested in art and poetry. He understood the culture of the world. He didn't see science as undermining religion. He said science only develops the religious person. I mean, you're right. He had this sort of unifying approach to the world and all its aspects, and it's wonderful. And then we have to finish.
You're right too.
All night. All night. You have to leave room for people not to be religious. These people left Russia in the first, second, third Aliyah to get away from any control of the rabbinate. They detested the rabbinate. They detested this world. Even like things like Kutzos Shel Yud by a guy who was just a maskil, could not stand the control the rabbinate had on these autonomous communities.
Right. But that you're absolutely right, Jerome. But the fact is that there was a lot of respect for Rabbi Kook. They saw Rabbi Kook as sort of breaking down boundaries. Yes. Because he did reach out to.
He was a very learned person. He knew the text, he knew the language, and he came to them with an open heart.
Right.
That's a different issue. But as far as putting themselves under the control of tzniut or anything like that, I mean, this is nuts that they would even consider such a control.
All right.
Before Shabbat, so Shabbat Shalom. Chag Sameach.
Shalom, shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi Chaim. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Giselle.
Bye, everybody.
Giselle, thanks. And Perla, thanks so much. Thank you.
Love you, Chaim.
Richard, take care. How you doing? How's your family, Richard? Tell me a word about your family.
Hi.
How's your family?
Let's catch up. We should catch up. I don't even know if I have your phone number.
It's 310-704-5747.
5747.
We should stop recording.
Yeah, exactly. I probably have it, but if not,